Hi Deborah, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you. I'm
That's
so
good.
pleased I was ready when you
I,
said I'm going to bring Deborah in now.
well,
So
I,
hi.
the thing about what it is, Deborah, is I can actually see you on my screen.
Oh, okay.
So I could see you were sitting there, you were smiling, you were ready, and I was just like, you know what, I knew you could hear me. Let's go for it. So we've been working on this for such a long time. How are you happy about this event? Are you looking forward to listening to all the other speakers? I know you're speaking first, of course, but are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, really. And I think we're really excited and really lucky to have such great speakers all in one event. And really want to thank everyone for saying yes to us. And coming on board. So yeah, really
That's
looking
fine.
forward to it.
Do you want to just give us I know I'm putting you on the spot now, a brief overview? What is Dyslexia Box? So what is the organisation Dyslexia Box? What do we do as a company and an organisation?
So, Dyslexia Box, we are a leading supplier of assistive technology and services such as strategy coaching, assistive technology training. And so we support neurodiversity in the workplace, and we come in to provide, it might be, for example, assessments, it might be towards the latter stage of the workplace process. So it might be strategy coaching itself or assistive technology. And we also provide technical support as well.
And also on top of that as well, you do a lot of work around access to work as well, don't you? And also that coaching, that training and support for those people that have neurodiversity. I know me personally, we've used it with my company, with Dyslexia Show and with Send Group, and we've also had some amazing technology from you. What we're going to do, Deborah, is we're a few minutes early. But I think actually we're going to go straight to your presentation because I'm really looking forward to listening to you. So I'm hoping you're ready. We're going to zoom in now to you, and I'm going to hand over to Deborah. Over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just getting my my app ready, which sort of changes the slides. So I'm hoping that is all working. I'm just going to open that up. So wow, I can see three of me on the screen. I don't know if you can, but anyway, I can. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Dr. Deborah Leveroy from Dyslexia Box. I am going to talk about the employee life cycle. I'm going to look at what exclusion might look like in the workplace for somebody with neurodiversity. And also I'm going to look at examples of inclusion and what that looks like. So I'm going to click my button on my phone. This is new to me, this app, so you'll have to excuse me. Great, okay. So I'm going to start off by, I guess, telling you a little bit of background information about my talk and what I was kind of thinking. So I had this idea for this talk and I was thinking I'm going to do this employee life cycle. So I'm going to go through the entire life cycle. Basically, I realized, no, I'm not going to do that. That's far too ambitious. I've got people coming on board, Jack and Laura, who are going to talk in detail about recruitment and onboarding. I'm specifically going to focus on the development and retention of employees in the workplace. So one other thing that I was thinking about when I was looking at this training, or rather this talk, was, what image can I start off with to explain what I kind of want to express, really. And so the image I've got is of snakes and ladders, because I think that this kind of is the image of what employment can look like for someone who's neurodiverse. So the idea is that you might do really well, and so you go up a ladder, but then something might happen. There might be a snake, if you like, and you go down the snake. So it's kind of chance in a way, because you're always you're rolling a dice. Sometimes it's going well and other times it's not going so well. So on to the next image I've got for you. So this is an image of the workplace. So obviously it's not literal because it's an image, but the idea is that what you see on the screen is you see boxes and lines, you see straight lines with rows and columns. And this kind of represents the kind of potential process that someone with neurodiversity is going into in a kind of pre-existing work structure. So you've got pre-existing processes that might be kind of predicated on working memory. You've got these kind of straight lines, which, if you like, represent that sort of linear way of thinking. And into that, you've got potentially somebody with neurodiversity. And just to say, when I'm talking about neurodiversity in the context of my talk, I'm talking specifically around dyslexia, dyspraxia, visual stress. So someone with dyslexia, dyspraxia might think non-linearly. So that might be a kind of image that they're thinking is much more free-form, that it's non-linear, that there's no maybe obvious pattern. And obviously I've used sort of different colors to represent that kind of diversity of thought. And so onto that sort of those squares, you've got this sort of non-linear image as well. And then the last kind of image I'm going to leave you with for my introduction is, there we go, is a painting of Jackson. Well, not a painting of Jackson Pollock, a painting that Jackson Pollock has done. And I'm using this painting. Someone I was listening to in a podcast talked about, who was dyslexic and dyspraxic, talked about their thought process being like a Jackson Pollock painting. And I just wanted to use that to kind of highlight that kind of diversity of thought, the different colors, the different ways of working. I really like that image. So I'm going to move on now to the next slide. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to introduce this fictional company, which I've called Nathan Jennings, which is a pharmaceutical company. It has, let's say, 15,000 employees in the UK, 3 locations, Manchester, Berlin, and New York. Now, into this company, into this structure, we have Mercy. So Mercy is the employee. She is a recruiter, specifically in the life science and tech sector. Her job role is very varied, but I'd say on the whole, the tasks, you could break them down into researching job roles, writing job descriptions, networking, interviewing prospects. Now, in terms of neurodiversity, she has dyslexia, dyspraxia, visual stress, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on. Now, crucially, she hasn't disclosed. So where we meet Mercy is she's already got the job. So as I sort of mentioned earlier, I'm not really going to touch on the recruitment and onboarding process. I'm going to leave that to sort of Jack and Laura. Not sure why that happened. Okay, well, it's taken me on, so that's fine. So anyway, we start Mercy's journey at the beginning. So you see Mercy at the bottom left. Mercy has been in the firm for a year. Now, obviously, just to say that recruitment and onboarding process is vitally important, and actually Mercy may not even be in this position. So she may not have even got the job because there would have been barriers to her getting it. But I'm going to make an assumption for the purpose of the talk that she has. So Mercy's been in the job for a year. She is, as I've said in inverted commas, coping. So that means that she has got pre-existing strategies that she's brought over maybe from a previous employment, potentially from university. So there she is, she's kind of going along. So then we have this first point of change, which is really important to think about. So we've got kind of multiple things happening. So we have Mercy crucially having a major life event. In this case, she has a baby, so she goes away for maternity leave for a year. Now, once she comes back, she's promoted to team leader, which is, of course, great. And she finds that the department is in a process of restructuring, which is why she's been promoted. I mean, aside from the fact that, she is good at her job, but essentially the promotion, she hasn't been told, she hasn't been prepped essentially for it. So we get this point of change, and then you get a kind of increase, if you like, in the stakes. So suddenly Mercy is put into a new situation. She has new challenges. Those old strategies that she was relying on suddenly don't work. So she's experiencing increased stress and reduced performance. Obviously, this is a very kind of brief overview for you, and there's many more things going on underneath the surface. We then reach a kind of crisis or tipping point. So this is when Mercy essentially fails her performance review. Her probation within the new role is extended, and she's put under a management plan. And after this, unfortunately, what we find is that there is a process then of disengagement. So there's a breakdown between Mercy and the team, the line management. The experience of being put under a performance review and the management plan has really affected her self-confidence and increased her stress levels even more. And therefore you get an increased absence. And then leading to potentially a separation, whether that's that she hands in her notice, she's managed out, and potentially there's some form of tribunal, which is obviously something that we want to avoid. Well, we want to avoid this whole scenario, and we're going to talk about how to avoid it in a minute. So I'm going to move the slide on, hopefully. So I'm getting a signal saying that my connection is lost, which means I can't move the slide on. So Aaron, are you there? Ah, okay, thank you. So I'm not sure if that was me who changed it or Aaron or Mason behind the scenes, but thank you. So what happens is you potentially could get this cycle or this journey being repeated. So that's why I've called it a sort of cyclical journey. So the cycle is that that individual is not reaching their potential for whatever reason. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. You get potentially a patchy career history. So for example, if you're a recruiter and you see someone's CV and you notice that there's a lot of kind of short-term employment, that might be one reason. So you have a process then of exclusion from that kind of, not necessarily a linear career path, because I think in this day and age, that isn't happening. Oh, my slide has now moved back. So thank you. Okay, so that process of exclusion, what is the, for example, financial impact on that individual, and what is the impact of of their well-being? So now, how do we prevent this outcome? Because none of us want that outcome for anyone. So I'm kind of going to break it down into 5 key areas. So look for signs, encourage disclosure, initiate a workplace adjustment process, measure the impact of change, be aware of change, and having an inclusive policy and practice in place. And we'll look at each one in more detail. Okay, so the first one is about looking for signs. You see, I've got my eyes here. So you as the line manager, as HR, you are looking for signs. So the idea is that we can't always assume that somebody is going to come and disclose to you for a number of reasons, and just because they haven't disclosed you doesn't kind of give us the reason to not do anything. So what we might see in someone who is neurodiverse on the kind of dyslexic, dyspraxic, visual stress, and even ADHD kind of side of things, is someone that has really good people skills. You get a lot of people in sales, in nursing, in counselling, in professions that require a lot of kind of face-to-face. Very good listeners, very empathetic. You also get people with very good analytical skills, so spotting patterns, making connections, able to see the big picture. And similarly, this idea of lateral thinking, so problem solving, using a kind of indirect and creative approach to solving problems, and in that process coming up with new ideas. So these are all fantastic skills that employers want. Now I'm going to move on. So what you would also see potentially, not with everybody, in terms of how someone might present, so these are the behavioural characteristics, is potentially the challenges. So you may have a discrepancy between the verbal and the written. So somebody may come across as very kind of, if you like, competent or, verbal, very good verbal skills in presentations or interviews or in client relations, but there's a discrepancy between that skill and when they put things in writing. So whether that's report writing, emails, you might notice spelling issues, problems with structure. And overall, what you might notice is this kind of good days, bad days. So there are days of where that person appears very kind of on it, if you like, and then there's bad days. So there's a kind of, a discrepancy between the two. You might see somebody that, or at least who appears to be forgetful, disorganized. They may miss deadlines. They may kind of misinterpret verbal instructions. Another bit of feedback that sometimes I find we get is, a line manager will say, well, in meetings, they just look blank. What's actually going on are they actually available? They may work late because they're having to kind of do more work than, you know, kind of to compensate, if you like, and that might have an impact on their stress levels. Someone with visual stress specifically may complain of headaches, of sore eyes. So that's kind of a very brief kind of overview of what signs as a line manager you may see, and you may not necessarily connect them with dyslexia, dyspraxia, but just to kind of give you an idea. So this, I think I'm still connected, so that's okay. So the idea is, I don't know if you can see under the kind of the squares, but I've got this kind of line. And the idea is that when we're looking for signs, it's only one part of it. So what we're seeing on the surface level, if you like, is the behavioral characteristics. So this is how someone presents. But you know, we all know that how someone presents and what's actually going on are often two different things. So you know, underneath the surface, you've potentially got, well, rather, there's a reason for these great skills and these potential challenges. So someone on the kind of dyslexic, dyspraxic continuum tends to have, and again, I'm being cautious, I don't want to say definitely has, so I'm, you know, just, yeah. So tends to have really high verbal skills. So that's all the things we talked about in terms of good people skills, talking, you know, all that kind of stuff, vocabulary, general knowledge. They also tend to have, particularly dyslexia, you know, high visual spatial ability. So this is this kind of problem solving, seeing the big picture. That sometimes can be not so high with the dyspraxia. The other thing, if you notice, you've got the vulnerability in working memory, which is the ability to hold information in the short term and carry out another activity, if you like. So that also affects the ability to make new skills automatic. And also processing speed. So you may find that experience of seeing someone and they look blank is actually because that processor in their brain, if you like, is kind of working and has kind of backed up in the same way that a computer sometimes backs up and can't kind of keep processing. And to your right, you see this visual stress, which is something that often gets kind of conflated with dyslexia, but it is something kind of distinct on its own. So you can have visual stress and not have dyslexia. You can have them together. That is that experience that we associate with dyslexia, of words moving around the page, of having kind of sensitivity to light, reading black text on a white page. People with visual stress, and also tends to be with dyspraxia, can get quite easily sensory overload as well. So that might be why you have an employee, for example, that's complaining of headaches and, you know, sore eyes and that kind of thing. Okay, so now unfortunately, no, yeah, I am connected. That's okay. So so what I'm just showing you here is this. When somebody has a formal assessment for dyslexia, they would get, you know, a report, and you would tend to find this what's called a spiky profile. So it's basically what we've just talked about: high skills in verbal comprehension, not very good skills in working memory, high in perceptual organization, and again vulnerability in the processing speed. So you get this what's called the spiky profile, which is very high in some areas and not so high in others. So what you would expect with someone potentially or generally that's neurotypical is kind of flatlining across. So at whatever point in the scales they are, you would have much more of an even profile. So that's just to give you a kind of a background, so that you kind of, as potentially as the line manager, you kind of can see what's actually going on underneath the surface. So we've looked for signs. The second thing is around encouraging disclosure. Now, there's obviously a massive kind of area of recruitment and onboarding that relates to disclosure that as I said, I'm going to leave Jack and Laura to talk about. But essentially, are we sort of creating a culture that encourages disclosure? How do we reduce stigma? Is that in the company culture? Is that through having employee resource groups? Is that through diversity training? It's also thinking about this concept, excuse me, this concept of intersectionality, which I know Gamil is going to talk about in detail later. So this is the idea that, you know, we will have more than one identity. So Mercy, for example, our case study, she's a woman of color, she's dyslexic, she's a mother. So you know, all these identities intersect and have an impact, and potentially that can have an impact on our ability to, or comfortableness, if you like, to disclose. So the second thing is, in that disclosure process, is being aware of assumptions. So I think when I say the word dyslexia, we often have a lot of assumptions about what it is, what it isn't. So we may think about, you know, a lot of, well, it used to be that dyslexia was the most kind of, if you like, famous neurodiversity because it used to get a lot of coverage in the press. So it would be always generally about children, and it would be about spelling and reading because that was the kind of government interest, if you like, and literacy. So we do tend to think about dyslexia being confined to spelling and reading, to do with children of school age. And so the idea that you have someone that is kind of performing competent, so someone with a degree, someone who has, you know, whatever it is, we have assumptions, well, you can't be dyslexic, or, you know, that sort of thing. So we need to think about, well, this is the appearance of someone and what is the reality. So it's really important with disclosure that we're getting their perspective, so we're not making assumptions. So it's their lived experience, which will be very different from maybe the employee you had 5 years ago who also had dyslexia. So we're looking for their individual pattern of strengths and challenges that comes from them, and that we're asking open questions. So we're not basing our questions on any assumptions we have. So how does it affect you at work? What support do you feel you need? And then also revisiting disclosure or encouraging disclosure at different points in that employee life cycle. So when there's a change, you may have a change of, might be a change of line manager. So or jobs. So you know, looking at revisiting this process. So right. So the next thing we need to think about in order to avoid that outcome, Mercy's outcome that we looked at, is putting in place a workplace adjustment process. Now, what does that look like? So workplace needs assessment, you may, as a line manager or HR, you may go to Access to Work, which is a government funded scheme, or you may go to a company and have that done privately. I will signpost you at the end of the talk. If you want to know more about Access to Work, we have a video which takes you through sort of step by step what Access to Work is and how to apply and all that. While you're going through that process, though, you will need to put in place interim adjustments. So it's not kind of, if you like, good enough that we sort of wait for that needs assessment and wait for those adjustments to be implemented. There are low or no cost adjustments and changes that we can make immediately. So there's then a process of implementing those recommendations. So we need to make sure that we have buy-in, if you like, from the line manager. So there's no point having adjustments if the line manager or the team aren't kind of on board or they don't understand. So that might be the time that you, as an adjustment, that you would have potentially some form of diversity training or co-coaching to bring, to make sure that everyone is supporting and on the same page. And also thinking about when you're implementing these recommendations that the adjustments are staggered. So it's not just, here's all the recommendations, go, you sort it out, but they're done in a certain order so that you're not kind of creating more barriers for that individual. You're doing it in a particular way. And then part of that process is a continual review of adjustments, which would need to be done at points of change. So for example, with Mercy, she got a new job. She should have, I don't think she was working with any adjustments to start with, but that would be the point where you would review her workplace adjustments and you would see how it needed to be changed. So some examples of workplace adjustments. So these are things I'm kind of well, I'll tell you what they are first, and then I'll talk about the medical model. But yeah, so some examples of adjustments that an assessor might recommend: assistive technology, text to speech, mind mapping, speech to text, and then of course assistive technology training to go alongside. They may recommend some strategy coaching. So for example, that would be to improve Mercy's self-awareness, if you like, or it's called metacognition, i.e. becoming more aware of how you learn, improving confidence, reducing stress, looking at strategies to improve concentration, planning, organization, memory, and communications, for example. And any particular equipment that person might need. So for example, noise cancelling headphones if they're working in an open plan office. Now I've put medical model here because these adjustments, although don't get me wrong, they're amazing and brilliant and really needed, they are still about getting that individual to kind of fit in. So it's very much that within model of disability, or a kind of let's kind of fix them. So we don't need to necessarily change the work environment, we can just change that individual. However, the next slide, which looks at kind of more inclusive models, I keep losing my connection, which is why, it's back. Okay, fine. So, here's some examples of how, I guess, as a line manager, as a team member, working with someone with neurodiversity, you can just start to think about how we change our processes. So, for example, I'm going to kind of divide it into, I guess, themes. So the first theme, the top left, is overlearning. So this is the idea that you're going to be, you should be providing information in different ways. So for example, it's not just the written word. You may supplement information in video form, in visual aids, diagrams, graphs, using color. You may also tell people things, you know, through spoken conversation. But the idea is that you're not just communicating through one method, that you're using lots of different ways. The second thing is chunking. So this is just breaking things down into small bits. So for example, a classic example of chunking that we do is what we all do, I'm sure, on a daily basis, is bullet points or small paragraphs. So rather than just giving people loads and loads of text and information, you're breaking it down for them and therefore making it easier for them to process. Providing schemas. So these are essentially templates. So that might be templates for reports, for emails. So giving the employee something to kind of hang off, if you like, something to kind of start with. So thinking about structure. So when you have a meeting, trying as much as you can as the line manager to have, when you're having regular meetings, that it's the same day at the same time. So trying to avoid kind of last minute meetings, because you're really thinking about, well, what's the impact of just calling a last minute meeting on that individual? So giving people the time to process information, so avoiding on the spot demands. Can I have this now? I need this by the end of the day, etc. Some people find a kind of open door policy quite tricky. So for example, an open door policy might be where you are kind of open, if you like, to anyone that comes in to ask you questions, and that can be potentially disruptive to that flow of work, but also you're kind of responding in the moment, and that can be quite difficult with that working memory issue. So yeah, trying to avoid basically last minute changes as well. So the next one is about the work rhythm. So making sure that you're providing regular breaks, but or rather that you're actively encouraging regular breaks. And that also you're enabling flexible working hours. Someone, for example, with dyslexia, dyspraxia, their working pattern may be very different to that 9 to 5. So if we go back to the beginning of my talk, when we use that square with the lines representing the workday, you know, that would be kind of representation, if you like, of a 9 to 5 workday. Someone with dyslexia actually may need to work differently. They may find that they're going to work better outside of that kind of regular 9 to 5 rhythm. So the physical environment. So what does that look like? So does that individual need a designated desk so that you're giving them a space that they can create that's theirs? Do they need access to a private or a quiet workspace when there's a lot of kind of activity and noise going on in an open plan office? And in some companies, there's even, for example, a sensory room where you can control the light and the sound. So it's those sorts of things. And this is, I've put at the bottom the social model, because it's actually about us as line managers changing how we do things. So the emphasis isn't just on the individual to change, but it's a kind of partnership between the individual and the employee, the company. So now I'm going to go back briefly to Mercy's journey, rewind Mercy's journey. So let's imagine that all those things that we've just talked about, you know, disclosure, workplace adjustments, etc., hasn't happened. So we're back to this kind of point of change. So this is this crucial moment. What's going to happen? Well, hopefully I can move on. Ah, that's it. Right, that's what's going to happen. So what is, just thinking in detail about what's the impact of that change of, you know, of having a baby, of coming back after a year, of you know, a new position, of restructuring. So we've got this, there's new role, new responsibilities. So for Mercy, we've got more report writing potentially, new procedures, line management responsibilities. These all have, you know, are new things for her to process. You've got potentially a lack of training. So there's an assumed knowledge because she's being potentially, well, she is being promoted. So you don't get that, maybe that designated training time that you would do maybe at the beginning when you were initially onboarded. Oh, I'm not sure why that's done that. I need to go back. I'm hoping it can go back, or someone can make it go back for me. Thank you. Yeah, okay, we're okay. So being aware of Mercy's experience, she's been away, she's had a break from the workplace. So she's settling into a new routine of, in this case, it's 9 to 5. You know, what does that mean after having spent kind of 9 months at home with a baby? It's a new environment, potentially new people, new expectations, plus she's managing that kind of caring or parental responsibilities on top of these, you know, these new experiences at work. She's entering a department that's going through restructuring. So there's no clear line management structure. There's new regulations. There's the department's, if you like, even purpose is kind of up in the air. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And on top of that, for her individually, there's no job description really, or kind of clear expectations. So she's kind of being left to just kind of get on with it, but she doesn't really know what it means. And then well-being. So what are the impact of all of these things? New role, lack of training, breaking from the workplace. What are the impact of all these things on her well-being? Also on her motivation and her mental health. So the potential outcome, which we've kind of covered, but just to go over, is there are performance concerns. She has a review and management plan. She disengages. There's, you know, it really affects her confidence. There's potentially a high sickness or absence record. And then there's a process of separation. So that's either that she gives her notice or she's kind of managed out. And then potentially a tribunal if workplace adjustments haven't been put in place. So reducing the likelihood of this outcome. So how do we do that? So we need to think about, you know, what are the new workplace adjustments that she needs that are relevant to her current role and the role plays to her strengths. And I'm sure that's something that Jack and Laura will talk about in terms of recruitment and job crafting. What training does she need? So is there a skills action plan in place? Any training needs to be structured and tailored. She needs to have one-on-one support with a line manager versus just being kind of given manuals. And any training is not just kind of, oh, sorry, that's because my phone's just gone, so it's interrupted. I need to go back. Right. So yeah, so being given training that isn't just kind of here's a handbook, go and read it, visual, audio, you know, information being given in different ways. As a company, if we're focusing on a kind of work-life balance, being aware of the individual's caring or parental responsibilities, providing opportunities for flexible time and also mentoring opportunities as well. So making sure that she feels engaged and valued. So that might be by regularly bringing her on board for feedback, through employee feedback or surveys, creating ERG, employee resource groups, development opportunities, and also looking at the company culture. So lastly, just to give you some examples of inclusive policy and practice, so the physical environment, there's a great article or piece of research called Designing a Neurodiverse Workplace by Hock, architecture firm. So they talk very much about choice, providing spaces, more than just one space, basically. So you might have a kind of breakout zone for people when they want to kind of work in groups, but you might have quiet designated spaces when someone just needs to concentrate. So lighting, removing fluorescent fixtures, making sure that your work, the physical building, is easy to navigate. Oh, I don't know why it's moved on, but I'm going back. Making spaces memorable. So for example, if you are dyspraxic, you might find that you often get kind of spatially disorientated. So when you're thinking about your workspace, how can you make it as memorable as possible? So thinking about your work process or flow, so asking that neurodiverse employee for input, for feedback on how you're doing things. So that might be about how you're communicating it, what the process looks like. So the culture, which we've touched on before, the work-life balance, thinking about how any kind of caring or parental responsibilities kind of work, providing flexi time. And also essentially providing, I guess, a culture of trust. So where someone feels psychologically safe to disclose, and kind of also, I guess, safe to kind of say, everyone, everyone makes mistakes, and, no one's perfect, and that's okay, Also thinking about how senior management can be part of this disclosure process, maybe by talking about their own experiences of how they learn, of any personal experiences of their children potentially with neurodiversity. So lastly, language. So making sure that the language that you're using is clear and consistent. So this is the language you're using for your employees, but also potentially for your customers, that the language you use is clear and consistent. The language is consistent, and also jargon free, and you're not kind of assuming knowledge within that. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, hopefully. So just to give you some resources to go away with that I found particularly useful, that Hock, Designing a Neurodiverse Workplace, if you just type it into Google, it will come up. ACAS has a really good white paper on reasonable adjustments. So does the TUC, Dyslexia in the Workplace. If you want to know more about access to work and how to apply, we have a video on our YouTube channel, which is called My Employee is Dyslexic, What Do I Do? If you just go to our website under, I think, news or events, it'll be in our YouTube channel. And then just some books that I found particularly useful. The first one is That's the Way I Think, Dyslexia, Dyspraxic and ADHD Explained by David Grant, who's an educational psychologist. Neurodiversity at Work by Theo Smith and Amanda Kirby. And lastly, Dyslexia in the Workplace by the BDA. So just before I leave you, just to let you know that we have there's a day 2 event tomorrow, which is one-on-one sessions with myself. If you're an HR professional or a line manager, or even just a member of a team, and you'd like some kind of one-on-one input or guidance, it might be, for example, you have an employee and you'd like to talk about how you can support them, look at what is a reasonable adjustment, troubleshooting specific workplace barriers, avoiding dyslexia discrimination in the workplace. So all of those things, or something else you might want to bring to the table. I believe we are going to be sending out an email with information on how to book that. We've got a couple of spaces left still. So yeah, just wanted to let you know that that's available. So thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you very much, Deborah. What an amazing session there. I think for me, it's like the things that came across were things like training is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Training, not just the line manager, but I think the whole team, to make sure that everyone's on the same page and can kind of support that individual and really understand how they work. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think culture is also another big thing. I think that's when you look at some of large organisations that don't have that culture where neurodiversity is supported, it can really affect people's mental health and really can change things. Do you think that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also the fact that, neurodiversity has been termed this sort of hidden disability. So it's no surprise that it has been kind of missed. But now there is obviously much more awareness, and that's why we're running this event today. And there's obviously been a lot of other events, and there's more being written about it, which is amazing. And then I guess the next challenge is, how do you translate all that enthusiasm and interest into kind of on the ground change, really?
I think that's the thing. I think it's harnessing that talent. I think in our next session we're going to learn more about that. So that's going to be really good. Now, if people have got questions, they can write them in the chat box on the right-hand side. I had to do that right because I had to make sure that my left and my right was correct on there. I think we've got a few questions already. So someone's asked about access to slides and, of course, about access to the recording. So I'll answer that one because it's easy. I know that Ben has already mentioned this on the chat, but we will send out any slides that the presenters allow us to send out, but the recordings will go live on our YouTube channel, probably in about a week's time. If you give us a week to edit them, and then we'll get them out there for you. So if someone wants to know more about Dyslexia Show, the event that you're coming to speak at, which I'm really looking forward to. I think you're opening our workplace event on the Friday. It's the 25th and 26th of March. It's at the NEC in Birmingham, and it's dyslexiashow.co.uk where you can find out more. So I know that we've had a number of questions. I know I think Ian had a question for us. Did we write? So this was all about the differences of concepts around looking at how ADHD and dyslexia and ASD and autism and dyscalculia, dyspraxic all overlap, and it's always good to support all the elements in this program. What's your feeling about having assessments for each individual one of them? What's your feelings about that?
I think any assessment has to be holistic anyway. So it's I guess as a needs assessor, you're always looking at that person as a whole, and whatever that the kind of challenge is in relation to the workplace. I guess potentially it cuts across any kind of label, if you like, because you're looking at that individual's experience. But yeah, I think obviously as a workplace assessor, you're looking at the individual in the workplace, and all of the potential challenges and obviously all of the opportunities that person brings to the workplace. So yeah, you're looking at it in a much more broader sense than just kind of, you're dyslexic, that means this kind of thing.
And what's your feeling about full diagnostic assessment? So you talked a lot about needs assessment. What's your feeling about, because I've had it where I've had a person come to me, they work for a large organisation, they think they're dyslexic, they've never been assessed. And what's your feeling about that concept? Is do people go and get a full diagnostic assessment, or do they not? What's your feeling around that?
I think it's like anything, it's a very personal choice. I think as a neurodiversity professional, it's my job to kind of give you the kind of positives, as in, this is why it's good and this is why it's not necessarily necessary. I guess, on the not necessary side, you don't need to have a formal diagnosis in order to access support. So access to work, that kind of model is much more about providing support first, rather than looking for a diagnosis or a label in order to access that support, because that in itself could be a barrier. The barrier to getting a diagnosis could be, for example, in the cost. There is a quite high cost in having a formal diagnostic assessment. But the positives are numerous, which is about, spending kind of 3 hours with a occupational educational psychologist who is purely looking at how you learn and how you process information, which we don't get very often in everyday life. And then, you're coming to a understanding more about how you learn, and that can be a very kind of light bulb moment and is potentially life changing. It also obviously has an emotional side of it, in the sense that when you read a diagnostic assessment, it doesn't necessarily read like you. It reads like, oh, I can't do things. And so what is the impact of that process on your self-esteem and working through that? And that's why I think when you do get a needs assessment and you have a strategy coach, they can really help you to work through all those feelings and kind of, well, strategies, looking at how your kind of self-concept as someone who's neurodiverse.
I think that's really interesting. So we've got one more question in a second. So I'm just going to ask you one more question before we get the next question come in, and that is, so you were talking there about coaching, and so you've kind of gave your opinion there. Is that something you think everyone should have, or is it very specific?
I think it's very specific, and also it's something that's recommended. So that's the job of the needs assessor, to make that assessment if coaching is useful. I think, yeah, it's depending on the circumstance. I think there could be a case where it's not that useful, maybe because well, I think potentially someone might not be open to being coached, and therefore does that really help that individual? If somebody is open and actually there's areas that need a bit of support, new strategies, then that's obviously something that's really positive. There's also something now called co-coaching, which is relatively kind of new, recent, which is when you have a coaching session with your line manager.
Oh, that's interesting. That is, because it's going to support you and your line manager, and that relationship to harness the strength, isn't it? So we've got another question. Yeah. So why this question is being read to me in my ear, because me trying to read the questions out and actually tell you the question is always going to be hard, being a dyslexic as well. So I'm just going to listen to this next question. So the question is do you ever feel that younger employees are less aware of the stigma that neurodiversity can have?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I know that's what I'm thinking as well.
Yeah. I mean, I can answer it. I've not done any research into that. I mean, I would imagine, so all I can go is what I think. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I think that there is potentially an issue around stigma and disclosure around older employees, because it's not necessarily something that they felt able to talk about when they were younger. I think not knowing that many young people, because I'm not that age anymore, but young people do seem to be quite keen to talk about who they are, and again, this is a massive generalization, but in terms of their experiences. So it would make sense that they're more kind of willing to kind of say, yes, this is me, because they do so on social media or whatever it is. But it'd be interesting to think back, how does that feed in when you go into a job and you have that professional kind of face, as it were?
It is very interesting. I'm a massive fan of social media platforms, and this social media platform where you probably do a dance in front of a video, but lots of people on there are actually very much disclosing their neurodiversity and talk about it a lot. So I think actually that younger generation are a little bit more open about it, but I think that we have to move away from the concept of stigma, because all of neurodiversity is evolution as well. I think it's evolution. I think it changes. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and I know that I can problem solve and come up with an idea and move things forward and find a solution for it. And is that my dyslexia? Is it my ADHD? Probably. But not being able to read the questions out is definitely my dyslexia, but I'm very open about it. We're doing a live stream, we're talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, now we move forward. So we haven't got any more questions. There's been some comments. People are really happy about your presentation. Some people really enjoyed it. It's really positive to see that. So I want to thank you, Deborah, for an amazing session.